book, The Upside of Uncertainty, which is about what are the tools we learn from innovators, creators, and designers for navigating the uncertainty that comes with doing anything new or the uncertainty we didn't expect that happens to us.
Nathan is a professor of technology strategy. We actually met as freshmen in undergrad and took philosophy classes and writing classes together. So actually, he's also been trained as a poet, so in creative writing, but ultimately is a wonderful thinker and writer about technology and ideas and innovation. And what else? We're actually married, so he's the father of our kids, and I'm the mom. So 4 kids.
Susannah is she is an entrepreneur, an innovator, a designer, and she's really the person in the family who is good at uncertainty. So while I am kind of the nerd who wants to study uncertainty and how to navigate it because I'm not good at that, Susannah is the person who is naturally quite capable at that. So she's quite an important guide on the journey through uncertainty. I have been interviewing innovators for about 20 years as part of my work. And one thing that really struck me is that to do anything new, every innovator I studied had to step into really significant uncertainty. And it just fascinated me, this question, because we talk all the time about innovation, how to come up with ideas, how to test ideas, how to win support for our ideas, but we never really acknowledge that doing anything new, whether it's a change, a transformation, or an innovation, requires that we step into the unknown. And so I wanted to understand, is there any method to the madness? Are there tools? Are there techniques that they use to navigate the uncertainty? So it's really about how do we navigate planned or unplanned uncertainty. One thing that was very clear to us as we reviewed the innovators and designers and creators we interviewed is they did have kind of a specific view about uncertainty. And it's a view that, if you really dig deeper, it's reflected in other philosophies you could read about, such as Stoicism and so forth. But it was basically the idea that in a world of uncertainty, if you believe everything is up to you and totally within your control, you're going to spend your whole life freaking out and stressing out. But if instead you recognize that really, to be honest, a lot of it is outside of our control. And if instead of focusing on these external goals, like how do I make, $10 million or do X or Y, if you instead focus on how do I be the best me, what would be the best life for me, and recognize that the outcome is somewhat out of my control, it helps people be a lot more calm under uncertainty. And so I think that Uncertainty Manifesto is our little nudge to people to say, hey, we've given you some really practical surface level tools, but you can also go a little deeper. And if you really look at it, you could adopt a view of life that would help you be calmer. And that is very specifically, most things in life are not totally within our control. So let it go and focus instead on how do I be the best version of me, make the greatest contribution to the world.
That Uncertainty Manifesto can be as simple as just a statement like, uncertainty really makes me uncomfortable, but I believe it is the only way to achieve any new transformation or joyful thing I want in my life. So it could be very small, but we feel like having something that you have thought through and that's simple to remember is really important, because in those moments when it feels like something's wrong with me, or I have made a bad decision, or this feels horrible, it must be wrong, having that sense of really that reframed view of uncertainty that, no, this is the portal. It's supposed to feel like this at first before any great thing.
So my code word for my Uncertainty Manifesto is what's the earnest way of doing things, which means focus on doing it well for the sake of doing it well and recognizing the rest isn't up to me.
I would just say that for me, I usually just have the basic gist of our book, which is uncertainty is the portal to possibility. So that's my kind of manifesto, that's the umbrella idea that is really something that actually is lucky that I just kind of always have baked in.
As human beings, we're wired to be afraid of uncertainty. And this is something that neuroscience studies clearly show. We have this natural orientation to try to eliminate all the uncertainty. But what we don't realize is that at the same time we're doing that, we're actually also eliminating possibility. If we're wondering how do individuals, teams, and organizations navigate uncertainty well, in the book, we organize these over 30 tools for navigating uncertainty around this metaphor of what we call the first aid cross for uncertainty. And it's basically four things. Number one, reframing uncertainty from something frightening, a source of loss, to a potential source of gain, seeing the possibility. Number two, priming, this idea that we can actually prepare so that when the uncertainty happens, we are more resilient. Number three, doing. There are ways we can take action under uncertainty that lead to better outcomes. And this is, lots of research supporting this. And number four, sustaining, acknowledging our humanness and our emotions, and how do we sustain ourselves when there are setbacks or when it creates anxiety. If we think about teams and how do we put together teams, one of the things we really encourage when we talk about priming is to do the work to understand your kind of strengths and weaknesses. So one tool that I actually got from my mentor at Stanford, Dr. Tina Seelig, was this idea of knowing your risks, that there are many kinds of risks. And most of us, we approach it, we think, I'm not a risk taker, or I am a risk taker, when really there's financial risk, social risk, intellectual risk, physical risk at an individual level. And so understanding your risk orientation and then having an open conversation about that, and then putting together teams or taking actions to ameliorate a weakness. The whole idea of the risk profile is knowing where you have a risk aversion. That's an area where you both want to fortify, but also ask, is it holding us back? And then asking, where do I have a risk affinity, and playing to your strengths.
As far as I would say in the book, we do give examples of like Martin Vanderbrink. He creates a team of people that are going to be different than him, that are going to push him, that are going to say, you're not right. And so I think a leader who's willing to be wrong and willing to have a team that's a little bit different is always going to be beneficial. Running that riskometer is so helpful. And we've done a few workshops with companies, and they've ranked themselves as individuals, and then also they kind of chart what they think their company is. And it's kind of hysterical because they'll rate their company in different ways, but it always gets the discussion going.
I love that you brought up Martin Vanderbrink. He's the CTO of ASML, which is one of the leading semiconductor lithography companies. And that's a great example of a huge uncertainty in a business environment, this invention of extreme ultraviolet lithography. It was this $5 billion multi-year investment. And it was fascinating because he talked about himself as a leader, and he said, listen, I'm never right. And my strength is that I'm sure I'm never right, but I'll throw an opinion out there and invite others to disagree with me, and I'm not afraid to change my opinion. So I love that he does that as a leader, but I like how you reminded us how he puts together people who are complementary to him, who see the world different than him, and encourage them to challenge him and ask him questions. I think there's kind of this two-sided thing, that on the one hand, great leaders challenge their organizations. They see the opportunity that uncertainty creates to learn quickly, to do new things, but they also, on the other hand, support their people and pay attention to the anxiety it creates, and create that rich soil to sustain them.
My favorite tool in the reframe section is the idea of playing an infinite game. So often we see life as a finite game, which means there's rules, there's roles, and we've got to play it and we need to win. And basically, James Cars, who wrote the book, gives us this wonderful idea that to be an infinite game player, instead of trying to be the best and win and, kill everybody else in the competition, instead, how do you keep the game in play, and how do you do it in a way that makes you feel joyful? And basically, infinite gamers are people who play for the love of the game. And so there's beautiful examples that you can read about in our book. But basically, I think when we are failing at something, if we can have this infinite game lens, what happens is we see it as, okay, this didn't work, but what can I do to keep this going? And maybe even if it's something that has ended and we don't have a choice to keep it going, how do I pivot? Or how do I start something else? keeping that learning and that beautiful growth that happened. There is always growth from any failure. So that's my favorite tool, probably.
There are so many tools in the book for helping you lower the heat of the uncertainty you feel. Interview these innovators, they say things like, I eat uncertainty for breakfast, or I love uncertainty. And I was like, oh, I'm not like that. But when you dug under the surface, what you found is they did all these other things in their life to create certainty, to create stability, so they felt less anxiety. So like Paul Smith, the very colorful designer, stays in the same room of the same hotel. One of the things that surprised me when doing this research is I started out with the question, how do we manage uncertainty? When I interviewed innovators and creators and designers and scientists, they would say, I love the topic, I love uncertainty, I don't like the word manage. And that was like really weird for me. And I resisted it forever until Susannah gave me this article about this gentleman, Roberto Burle Marx. And he was one of the great modernist architects. And he tells this story about how he was from Brazil originally, and he'd gone to Berlin for art school. And he had this epiphany moment when he went to the Berlin Arboretum, where they were having an exhibit on these Brazilian plants. And he walks in this Arboretum on a gray day, and you have these incredibly colorful Brazilian plants, tattoo flowers and all this, rich flora in these little concrete containers, and they're like bursting out of these containers. And he said, what if the question isn't how do we manage and control something, but rather how do we activate and unlock the potential that's there? And for me, that was like a transformational moment, because I said, what if the question is not how do we manage and control uncertainty, but how do we activate and unlock the potential that's there?
My biggest surprise and happiest heartwarming thing has been when we've taught workshops, and specifically the very first workshop we tested back when we just had our first draft of our book was with just people all over the world that they were LinkedIn community friends of Nathan's. And so it was all over the globe, but also different industries. And after the very first session, which was focusing on the reframe set of tools, one of the participants a few weeks later was able to say, you know what, that changed my life. That was like a bolt, an injection of so much joy. And because she had also in her breakout room been able to have a conversation with other people, and she decided, I'm going to leave this job and I'm going to take this new opportunity. And she said, I know I wouldn't have been able to because there were already so many other COVID related stressors for her at that moment in her life. She really unlocked her own potential, really. And I think when you were saying the most amazing transformation is when we unlock and activate ourselves. And often we are worrying too much about how can I be the best employee or thinking outward. But when we unlock our own capability with relation to uncertainty, then we are just kind of unstoppable. So workshops have proven that people need to talk about this with others. It's something that we can help each other, just commiserating, but also pumping ourselves up. And then that these tools really can be a light switch moment. And I'm so grateful that it has been helpful for people.
We all want possibility, transformation, change, innovation. But the only way to get to that is through uncertainty. And so if we want those things, we need to get better at navigating that uncertainty as individual leaders, as teams, and as organizations. And so organizations are going to need to ask the question, do we have the ability to face uncertainty? What is our uncertainty ability? I believe uncertainty ability is like a capability. It's a muscle we can build in our organizations. And this is a capability that we can build. There are organizations out there like LVMH, which is a luxury brand group that hire for this. And one of the CEOs we interviewed, he built up a group that tripled its revenue in a very crowded market, and he attributed it to the ability to navigate uncertainty. I guess my main message to leaders out there is that we live in a world of increasing uncertainty. So we need to develop this uncertainty capability in ourselves and in our teams to prosper. And I think, the former CEO of Ben and Jerry's, Justin Solheim, said this very well. He said, there's ambiguity and paradox everywhere. The linear route is getting hard. The linear route forward is getting harder and harder for anybody in any field. And so our message would be there are tools out there. We can develop our uncertainty capability, and that we should pay attention to it if we want to prosper in this era of change and dynamism.
I like that. I would also add, again, a plug for managers and leaders to really lean into the need for emotional hygiene. We talk about that in the sustain section. But I think often we read about how CEOs, if they're having a high level of fear and stress, but are kind of trying to hide that or downplay that, it's still felt in the organization. It actually trickles down, and that anxiety level is totally normal. They should feel it. And so while they do need to have a sense of control and show a face that is, we kind of know what to do, having the ability to really learn and embrace these tools personally will really help them lead others through it. So I hope that managers will do these applications with their human being lens and less of like, I'm the manager, and then go back through and think about how they could help their teams with it.
The research is very clear. There's research in the fields of ambiguity tolerance, uncertainty avoidance, resilience, that you can learn it, but the gap we felt was how. But one of the things that speaks specifically to this question of, are there cultures that are better at it? There was a very famous series of studies by a gentleman named Gert Hofstadter, in which he measured global cultures in terms of 5 attributes. And one was their uncertainty avoidance. And it's very clear that there are some cultures where everybody has learned to tolerate uncertainty more than others, which means it's not DNA, right? It's something we learn. And you can look at the index to see which are the high uncertainty embracing cultures. Mexico is a high uncertainty embracing cultures. They tend to be cultures where there was a lot of uncertainty already. And so part of growing up was learning to realize the world changes, things are uncertain. How do you make sense of that? And so when it comes to teaching younger people, we can actually draw a lot of lessons from those cultures where they have some really wise sayings. And actually one of our favorites was, there's a whole movement around, we didn't talk much about it in the book, but about this enoughness movement. There's a whole set of cultures that focus instead on what do I already have, and maybe I already have enough. And when you realize you probably have enough, you become a lot less anxious about uncertainty, because you're like, yeah, I could try something new. I have enough. Whereas if you're thinking, oh, how do I get more? Then you become really anxious about uncertainty, because it's about how do I win this? And I don't, you calculate the risk and really obsessing about it. Whereas if you say, I kind of already have enough. If I try something new, that, and it works, great. If I try something new and it doesn't work, I'll be okay.